I'm 56 years old and my name is Daniel Mercer, and before everything collapsed, I genuinely believed I had done life the right way. I believed loyalty mattered, that consistency mattered, that being present every single day meant something, even if you weren't the biological parent. I married my wife, Lava, when her daughter Emily was 6 years old, and from the very beginning I never tried to replace anyone. I just showed up. I packed lunches, attended school meetings, fixed bikes, sat through dance recitals, helped with math homework late at night, and stood quietly in the background when Emily talked about her real dad, a man who appeared and disappeared from her life whenever it suited him. I never complained, never competed, never demanded recognition, because I thought love earned quietly was stronger than love demanded loudly. For years that belief carried me. I worked hard, climbed steadily in my career, and when my company offered overseas transfers Singapore, Germany, Japan, I always declined because Lava said she needed stability and Emily needed consistency. And I believed them both. Christmas, birthdays, milestones, I was always there. I thought that meant I belonged. The first crack appeared the night Lava sat across from me at the kitchen table, her voice calm in that way people use when they've already decided something and are just informing you of it. She told me she and Emily would be spending Christmas with her ex, because as she put it, Emily needs her real father right now. I waited for the rest of the sentence. The part where she reassured me I was still important, still included, still family, but it never came. When I asked where that left me, she didn't hesitate. She said if I didn't like it, I could divorce her. No argument. No discussion, just an ultimatum wrapped in indifference. I remember noticing small details in that moment, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the clock ticked too loudly, the fact that my hands were perfectly steady even though something inside me had gone very still. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't plead, I didn't accuse. I simply nodded, stood up, and went to the bedroom. That night, while Lavra slept peacefully, I opened my laptop and reread the email I'd ignored for 3 years, the Japan transfer. Offer senior role, long-term assignment, full relocation package. I had always said no because I thought being needed at home mattered more than being respected at work. But respect, I realized, had quietly disappeared from my house anyway. By morning, I had accepted the transfer. I packed my bags methodically, not out of spite, but clarity. When Lavra woke up and saw the suitcases, she laughed at first, thinking it was a bluff, a dramatic gesture meant to scare her. She stopped laughing when I handed her the confirmation email. I told her I wasn't divorcing her, not yet, but I wasn't staying where I was optional. Emily wasn't home when I left. That hurt more than anything else, but I told myself she'd understand someday. Japan was supposed to be an escape, a reset, a way to pour my energy somewhere. It would at least be acknowledged. But what I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my departure triggered consequences no one had planned for. Because while Lavra thought she had all the leverage, while her ex believed he was reclaiming a role he had abandoned years ago, there were things tied to my presence that extended far beyond emotional comfort, legal structures, financial dependencies, custodial assumptions that had never been questioned because I was always there to smooth things over. And 1 week after I boarded that plane, while I was sitting in a small Tokyo apartment surrounded by unopened boxes, my phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Lavra. She wasn't calm anymore. She wasn't confident. She was panicking. And before I even said hello, I knew whatever control she thought she had was already slipping through her fingers. When I answered Laura's call, the first thing I heard wasn't anger or accusation, but raw fear, the kind that strips pretense clean away. And in that instant, I understood that whatever illusion of control she had enjoyed was already collapsing under its own weight, because she wasn't calling to negotiate or threaten. She was calling because something had gone wrong and she didn't know how to fix it without me. She spoke quickly, breathlessly, words tumbling over each other as she tried to explain that her ex had shown up late to pick Emily up, that he had been drinking again, that an argument had erupted in the driveway loud enough for neighbors to hear, and that someone she didn't know who had called the police, which would have been inconvenient but survivable if not for the fact that during the questioning, someone mentioned school records, medical authorizations, and custody paperwork. And suddenly everything Lavra had always assumed was handled came under scrutiny. She told me the officers were polite but firm, that they asked why Emily's primary emergency contact was me, why I was listed as the legal guardian on multiple forms, why financial responsibility records showed my name instead of her ex's, and why if Emily needed her real father, that father hadn't been contributing anything verifiable for years. And as she spoke, I could hear the panic rising, because Lavra had never really understood how much of our family structure rested quietly on my back, unseen and unacknowledged, but essential. I listened without interrupting, not out of cruelty, but because for the first time she was finally seeing the shape of the truth rather than the version that suited her, and when she finished, her voice broke as she asked me what she was supposed to do now. Because the school had frozen certain permissions pending clarification, social services wanted follow-up documentation, and her ex predictably had vanished the moment accountability appeared. I told her calmly that I didn't know what she should do, because for years I had been the one quietly doing things so she wouldn't have to think about them. And now she was experiencing what life looked like without that buffer. She tried to pull me back in emotionally then, reminding me of everything we'd built, of how Emily loves you, of how I was still her father in every way that matters. And hearing those words hurt more than I expected, because they came only after my absence created consequences, not when my presence deserved respect. I told her I wasn't abandoning Emily, but I wasn't undoing my decision either, and that whatever happened next would have to be based on truth, not convenience. After we hung up, I sat alone in that quiet Tokyo apartment and felt the weight of something lift, not because I enjoyed her distress, but because for the first time in years I wasn't being asked to erase myself to keep the peace, and thousands of miles away, a process had begun that no apology or ultimatum could stop. One that would force everyone involved, especially Emily, to finally see that I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stopped holding everything together in silence. By the time Part 3 began, the shock had settled into something heavier and more dangerous reality, and I could feel it even from across the world. Because Lavra didn't call anymore in bursts of panic, she called in fragments as if each conversation cost her pride she could no longer afford. And she told me how Emily had stopped sleeping through the night, how she kept asking why the police had come, why her real dad never showed up when things got serious, and why I wasn't there even though I was still listed on every form that seemed to matter. Lavra tried to sound composed, but I could hear the strain as she explained that the school counselor had requested a meeting, that social services had formally opened a review, not an accusation, just questions, and how those questions all seemed to circle back to me, my absence louder than my presence had ever been, because suddenly everyone wanted to know why the man who handled doctor visits, parent-teacher meetings, emergency pickups, insurance claims, and bedtime routines had simply vanished after Christmas. What Lavra didn't expect, what none of them expected, was that Emily herself had begun speaking up, telling her counselor in that quiet, careful way children do when they're trying to be fair, that I never missed a school play, that I was the one who helped with math homework even when I was exhausted, that I packed her lunches and stayed up late when she was sick, and that when her biological father promised to come and didn't, I was the one who sat with her until she stopped crying, and hearing this secondhand cracked something in me, because for years I'd worried that my love would be invisible, that biology would always outweigh consistency, yet here was proof that children remember who shows up, not who shares DNA. Lavra told me Emily had asked a question that left her speechless. If he wasn't my real father, why did he do all the real father stuff? And in that moment, the story Lavra had told herself for years began to unravel, because you can rewrite history for adults, but children have an unfiltered memory for care. Meanwhile, the legal process moved quietly but steadily, with requests for documentation, financial records, custody clarifications, and written statements, and for the first time I wasn't rushing to fix things behind the scenes. I was responding, deliberately, truthfully, providing facts without emotion, because I'd learned that dignity sometimes means letting the truth speak without decoration. At night in Japan, alone with my thoughts, I wrestled with guilt and resolve in equal measure, missing Emily fiercely, but knowing that returning prematurely would only teach her that ultimatums work, that love must be proven by self-erasure. And so I stayed where I was, steady and present in the only way I could be, answering her messages when she sent them, reminding her gently that I hadn't left her, only the chaos. And as the weeks passed, it became clear to everyone involved that this wasn't a story about abandonment at all, but about exposure, about what happens when the person holding everything together steps aside and lets the truth finally take up space. Japan was quieter than I expected, not the kind of silence that crushes you, but the kind that slowly forces the truth to speak, because for the first time in years no one was shouting over my choices or rewriting my intentions, and as I settled into my new role, my new apartment, my new routine, I realized I hadn't run away at all. I had finally stepped out of a cage I didn't know I was living in. And that realization was exactly what my wife hadn't planned for, because she was convinced that once Christmas passed I'd beg to come back, that I'd call in tears, that distance would weaken me, but the opposite happened. And as days turned into weeks without drama, without pleading, without emotional chaos from my side, her sense of control began to collapse because I wasn't just her husband. I had been the stabilizer of that household, the silent force keeping everything upright, and once I was gone the cracks appeared fast. Her ex, the man she insisted was the real father, turned out to be a holiday version of a parent great with gifts, photos, and promises, terrible with structure, patience, and responsibility, and my stepdaughter noticed long before the adults did, because the excitement faded quickly and what replaced it was confusion, then disappointment, then questions no one wanted to answer, questions like why I hadn't fought, why I hadn't yelled, why I'd simply left, and my wife tried to reshape the story, blaming my job, my ambition, my distance. But lies don't survive routine, and eventually even she couldn't keep track of her own version. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing for what I knew was coming. Separating finances, securing documents, consulting legal counsel, not out of revenge but self-preservation, because dignity doesn't scream at plans. And when she finally called me, her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was panicked, full of questions about money, about responsibilities she'd never handled alone, about consequences she assumed I'd always absorb. And when she accused me of abandoning her daughter, I told her the truth for the first time, without emotion, that men who abandon children don't leave silently. They leave carelessly, and if she wanted to talk about abandonment, she should remember who drew the line first. The divorce papers didn't shock me, but what happened next did, because once the case moved beyond emotions and into record school involvement, medical decisions, daily routines, written communication, the narrative she built began to unravel. And the most powerful moment didn't happen in a courtroom argument, but in a private conversation between my stepdaughter and the court-appointed advocate, where she spoke without pressure, without sides to choose, and said something that shifted everything, that she believed I left because I didn't want her stuck in the middle, because I didn't want her to feel like she had to choose. And when mediation day came and she looked at me and quietly said, "I knew you didn't leave me," I understood that silence, when paired with truth, is louder than any defense, and that by refusing to disappear emotionally even after being pushed out physically, I had protected the one relationship that mattered most, while every lie built to erase me had collapsed under its own weight. By the time the final hearing arrived, the anger was already gone, replaced by something far heavier and far more dangerous to lies' clarity, because once emotions burn out, only facts remain, and facts have no sympathy for manipulation. My wife sat across the table, no longer confident, no longer rehearsed, because every document told a story she could no longer control. The messages where she gave ultimatums, the records showing I never stopped providing support, the school forms listing me as the primary contact, the testimonies from teachers who knew who attended every meeting and performance, and slowly the picture formed of a man who didn't disappear, but stepped back to protect a child from becoming collateral. Damage and adult selfishness. When the judge spoke, there was no drama, no speech about villains or heroes, just a calm dismantling of the fantasy she had built that love can be demanded, that loyalty can be enforced, that fathers are interchangeable, and the ruling didn't punish her, it simply corrected reality, affirming my continued role in my stepdaughter's life, formally and legally, something she never imagined could happen once she tried to erase me, and in that moment I realized revenge isn't loud or cruel, it's quiet and irreversible because nothing hurts manipulation more than being rendered powerless. After the case closed, my wife tried one last time to talk, to explain herself, to reframe intentions. But some doors don't slam shut, they just stop opening, and I wished her well without offering access, because forgiveness doesn't require re-entry. The true ending came weeks later, on a video call I hadn't expected, where my stepdaughter spoke with a steadiness that only comes from feeling safe, telling me about school, about friends, about how she hated being treated like a symbol instead of a person, and when she said she finally understood that staying doesn't always look like standing still, that sometimes love chooses distance, so a child doesn't have to carry guilt, I knew I hadn't failed her, and that was the only verdict that ever mattered. Japan became more than a transfer, then it became proof that life doesn't end when someone tries to discard you. It realigns, and the man who once packed his bags quietly on Christmas wasn't broken or defeated, he was simply finished accepting conditions on his dignity, and as I stood in my apartment that night, looking out at a city built on resilience and reinvention, I understood the final truth of the whole ordeal, the moment I refused to argue, refused to beg, and chose myself without abandoning love. Everything they thought they controlled collapsed, not because I fought them, but because I stopped letting them define me.